Today our focus is going to be on moist heat cooking methods. The world is covered with water. Most of the vegetables and the foods we eat are comprised primarily of water. As one simple example, a head of lettuce is more than 90% water. Even our bodies are about 70% water. It's safe to say that liquid is all around us. In moist heat cooking, it's really all about finessing the application of heat to liquid. Now, there's a subtlety that I hope is not lost on you. Already we've sautéed a chicken breast, and the heat of the pan got high enough to drive the moisture out of the surface of the chicken breast to bring the temperature above boiling to above 300 degrees where browning can begin. But deep inside that chicken breast, the temperature is relatively low, the moisture is at about 60 or 70%, and at the end of the day, cooking the interior of that chicken is nothing more than a moist heat cooking technique. So, what techniques are we talking about when we say moist heat cooking? Have you ever heard of freezing, of poaching, simmering, boiling, steaming, or even pressure cooking? Those are all moist heat cooking techniques that represent the application of heat to liquid in varying degrees of temperature. Freezing, as an example, is the absence of temperature. We take heat away until a liquid turns from a liquid to a solid. Poaching takes place at a much higher temperature, around 160 degrees. Raise it to 185, and now we're looking at simmering. Boiling, as you know, happens at 212 degrees. And if I channel for just a second my high school chemistry teacher, we need to add more energy to boiling water to get it to change phase to a vapor, to steam. I think it's 80 calories per gram. So you have more energy available to you to cook in steaming than you do in poaching or boiling. Finally, pressure cooking takes advantage of raising atmospheric pressure so that you can eke out a couple of more degrees of temperature. Our goal at the end of this lesson, or by the end of this lesson, is to make sure we understand the application of heat to liquid. Let's get started by poaching some salmon. Let's talk about poaching for just a second. Poaching comes to us in two very broad categories. One is called deep poaching, where we poach some food completely submerged in liquid, and the other, shallow poaching, which we'll practice a little bit later on, where you use less liquid and that liquid becomes the basis for a sauce. I'm going to deep poach some salmon, and what we're going to do is cut some portions of this salmon so that we can poach it. There's one, there's two, and then I'm also going to take some thinner pieces as well so that hopefully we get some that's properly cooked, some that's overcooked, and some that is maybe a little bit undercooked. We're going to cook this salmon in a court bouillon, which is nothing more than a vegetable stock that has the addition of a little bit of acidity and some herbs. The idea here is that we're going to cook in a liquid, but we don't want that liquid to rob flavor of the food that's cooking in it. So here's what I'm going to add. I've got some herbs. I've got parsley and thyme and bay leaf, and I've got a little strip of lemon zest, which I'm going to wrap around the outside, and I'm going to tie it into a little bundle. This bundle is not unlike the sachet de piece we were talking about before, the little tea bag that has bay, peppercorns, thyme, so on and so forth. This is called a bouquet garni. So a little bouquet that's going to go right into our court bouillon or our vegetable stock. I also want to put some acidity in there. And the acidity is going to come in the form of a little bit of wine. And I'm also going to add some lemon. Now, how do you know when you've got it right? I'll tell you in two shakes. You grab a spoon, and it should have a good flavor. I'm even going to season this with a little bit of salt and some pepper. Good. Now, back to our salmon. The foods that are appropriate for poaching are foods that are already naturally tender. There is nothing about the delicate heat of poaching that will make tough foods tender. So I can't, for instance, poach a beef shank. It just would not work. I can't poach a tough piece of chuck. That wouldn't work either. That's great for braising and stewing, but not really for poaching. What I want is naturally tender food. A chicken breast would work really well. Shrimp would work fine. This salmon is a great choice. Naturally tender foods. This is a delicate cooking technique, so we need to make sure the temperature is just right. And I'm going to put a thermometer into this very, very quickly. And what we're looking for is a temperature of about 160 degrees. And I've got it now at about 150. The reason for that, I just added some wine and some lemon to it. So I'm going to bring it up to a higher temperature. And what I'll tell you is that even if you don't have a thermometer, there's a couple of clues that I'll give you. The first is that you should not see bubbles breaking in the poaching liquid. If you do, you're probably at a minimum of 180, 185 degrees. You're at a simmer. There's another clue, and that is at about 160 degrees, you'll just begin to see a little bit of steam coming off of the bottom of this of the liquid in this pan. And that steam is a great indicator that you're on the right track. You'll see earlier than either of those temperatures, at about 140 degrees, a convection action that begins to take place in the bottom of this pan. So this is coming up to temperature. I see a little bit of action in there. I'm going to put my thermometer back in there. And we are at 170 degrees. So we can turn it down and we're off and running. If I look at it, I can see a little bit of steam. Hopefully you can see that as well. Now, I'm not going to season this because if I do, all the seasoning will be rinsed off. But when I put it into liquid that's already seasoned, that liquid will lend its flavor to this fish. You'll see when you put it in that the protein on the surface will begin to darken a little bit. It turns opaque. While this fish is poaching, I'm going to make a sauce, a quick sauce. The sauce is going to be a salsa verde, or a green herb sauce. I've got lots of parsley here. I've got 2 or 3 anchovy fillets, clove of garlic, and some capers as well. First thing I'm going to do is deal with the garlic. That couldn't be any easier. And I'll take that smushed clove of garlic and add it to the parsley and begin to chop this all up. It's a great little technique that if you are chopping things that are full flavored like garlic and anchovies, if you chop them with parsley, the flavor of those ingredients makes its way into the parsley and doesn't get smeared all over your cutting board. If I think about what's going on over here in this pan, the temperature probably dropped down about 10 degrees or so as soon as I put the protein in there because that was at room temperature. We don't want the temperature to go much above 160, 165 degrees. If you see little beads of white protein beginning to form on the surface, that's known as albumin. And albumin coming out of the fish is indicative of a temperature that's too high. That's a good clue that you need to turn the temperature down. All right. I'm going to gather this simple sauce up and put it into a bowl. To finish it up, we need some olive oil. I need to moisten it with a nice olive oil. I need to add some lemon juice to this as well. And a little bit of salt and pepper. If you like it spicy, you could put pepper flakes in here as well. That's sort of my passion. And we owe ourselves the favor of just tasting this. Inasmuch as it's a sauce, it should be more assertive. It shouldn't taste great right off the spoon because it's going to have to flavor all of this fish. Let's see how we're doing over here where the fish is concerned. I can give it a little squeeze, and it will tell me how things are coming along inside. When it comes out, I'm going to put it right onto a plate that has an absorbent towel. The idea here is that we want to absorb all that excess liquid. The thicker pieces are very close. Handle it a little bit gently. What I've got here is a skimmer that supports the fish so that it doesn't break. Okay, we have the sauce made. We have the fish made. I'm going to blot it just briefly and take this piece of fish and break it open. Now, it is a tiny little bit translucent, but as you get closer and closer to the end, it is no longer translucent. Instead, it is opaque throughout. We've cooked it gently, certainly, but it's opaque throughout, and probably, as it cools, will be a little bit dry. Here is a large piece, and if I break into that, you will see that it's still basically uncooked on the inside. There is a little bit of the fish that has not cooked yet, and so that is undercooked. And our hope, my hope, is that this piece right here is perfectly cooked. I'm not going to break it open. If you're at home and you're in doubt at all, one thing that you can do is take your portion of fish, and if this is the presentation side, you can turn it over and just cut in from the back and have a little look-see, and you're off and running. So, I'm going to take this, set it aside, just so that our plate is nice and hot. I'm going to put this back in just to warm a little bit. I'm thinking a wedge of lettuce or a wedge of lemon is a nice idea with this fish as well. We're going to set that on the side. I'm going to pull this piece of fish out. We'll blot it quickly dry and move it to the plate. Now, if this were a chicken breast that we browned really well, there'd be a lot of flavor that came from browning. Poaching doesn't give us that flavor, neither does poaching give us the difference in texture and the bright color. So this sauce is an integral part of this dish. I would not serve it on the side. I would put it right over the top. Some people would say what I'm doing is I'm masking the sort of pale appearance of this. I don't think of it as masking. I think of it as complementing. I want to cut into this and see exactly what the fish is looking like. And I'm going to turn it around so that you can see it as well. It's moist. It flakes easily. It doesn't fight back. And when I get a little bit of the fish and the sauce together, I'm looking for a very specific combination of flavor. The fish is about richness and texture. The sauce is about depth of flavor. So there's a lot of acidity and salt in there from capers and anchovies, and the two marry really, really nicely together. That's it. We've deep poached a piece of salmon. We made a really simple sauce. Other fish could be poached as easily. The sauce could be mayonnaise-based. But this technique is really critical for your moving ahead in cooking. Next, I'd like to show you shallow poaching. We're going to make a monkfish provençal where the poaching liquid actually becomes the basis for the sauce. Now we're going to shallow poach some monkfish. Now, before we get started, let me just share with you again the difference between shallow poaching and deep poaching. We already deep poached salmon where the fish was completely submerged and we made a sauce on the side. We're going to use a similar cooking technique for shallow poaching, but we're going to use less liquid, and that liquid will become the basis for the sauce that accompanies some fish. So why don't we get started? The pan I'm going to work with is a sauteuse. This is the pan with the sloped sides. Earlier, we deep poached, we had a lot of liquid, and so I used a sautoir, which has the straight sides and it's a little bit deeper. That's perfect for holding a lot of liquid. Here I'm going to use less liquid, and this smaller pan is probably appropriate. I'm going to grab some butter, and we're going to butter the bottom of this pan. We certainly don't want this fish to stick to the pan. That would be a nightmare. So a little bit of butter in the bottom of the pan guarantees that we won't get any sticking. And next, I'm going to put some aromatic vegetables on the bottom. Here what I have is some shallots. You may or may not have used shallots before. The beauty of shallots is it has sort of a powerful onion flavor, but more than that, it's a smaller bulb. And so when you go to mince it finely, it's much easier to get the pieces small. That's what we're looking for here. And so I'm going to sprinkle the bottom with just some shallots that have been minced up very, very fine. The other nice thing is that will hold the fish up from the bottom and help prevent it from sticking. All right, the fish is going to go in, and I'm going to place it into this pan with the presentation side uppermost. So the nicest part of the fish is uppermost. 4 pieces of fish go in. One of the challenges with poaching, and you saw it already with the deep poached salmon, we don't get any browning. You don't see any variance in texture because the temperature is very, very gentle and mild. So it's not too soon for us to start to think about exactly what this is going to look like at the tail end. So with that idea in mind, I'm going to season it with salt. I'm going to add some pepper to it. And then, so it's a little bit showier, I'm going to take some nice ripe tomato concasse, peeled, seeded, diced tomatoes, and I'm going to top each piece of fish with some tomato. This will give us some bright color. It will flavor the fish as it cooks, and it will give us some variation in texture. All the things that we might decide we miss when we're poaching instead of sautéing. I also have some thyme here, and I'm going to flavor this fish with thyme. I left the leaves in sort of larger pieces because I think it looks nice that way. We'll set that aside. And we can take this and move it back over to the stove. This is just about ready to poach. We've got another concern, though. We're going to turn our poaching liquid in this shallow poach into a sauce. So I'm going to add 2 things, fish stock and white wine. The white wine that I'm going to use is a Sauvignon Blanc. I want a wine that has a backbone of acidity, nothing sweet, something that's got some sharp acidity that will lend structure to this dish, that will cut through some of the richness of cream and at the same time maybe cut through any little bit of fishiness that you might notice. So I'm going to add 50% wine and 50% fish stock. You already saw how to make fish stock. If you don't have fish stock available, you can use canned clam juice even. All right. One more thing. You might ask yourself how much liquid should go in here. If you're not going to cover it the way you do in deep poaching, how much liquid is appropriate? And some people will say the liquid should come 1/3 of the way up. Others will say it should come 1/2 of the way up. But from my perspective, you need to have enough sauce at the end of the day for 4 portions of monkfish. Any liquid less than that, you're wasting a portion of fish. Any liquid more than that, and what you'll discover is that your sauce lacks depth. You've got too much liquid and it watered down the savor of this preparation. Now, because it's not covered, we need a tight-fitting lid. This is an easy way to go right here. But let me show you another technique. This is something that the French call a cartouche. This is a piece of parchment paper, and I fold it in half, and I'm going to fold it in half again, and I'm going to fold it in half again, and one more time after that, and I'm going to size it to this pan, make a little vent right in the middle, and when I unfold it, everything should be right with the world. That should fit right here on top. The beauty of this is that with a paper right on top of the fish, it holds the steam or the moisture in place. The temperature of this should be exactly the same as the temperature for deep poaching. So simmer tells me I'm at about 185 degrees. I'm going to turn the heat down so that it's slightly cooler than that. I'm going to take the paper cartouche and I'm going to press it right on top of the fish and then a tight-fitting lid. In the event that you don't have a lid that fits your sauteuse, you can easily take a piece of foil and seal it that way. We're going to let this cook. I would say it's going to take about 8 minutes per inch of thickness. So we're going to step away. I'll get things cleaned up, and then we'll come back later on and we'll finish this dish. Okay, time for us to check in on this fish. You can see the steam that's trapped underneath the cartouche here, and the fish should be done. One of the nice things about the monkfish is that it's a little meatier. It holds up to temperature a little bit better. Now, I'm going to give it a squeeze. It should feel firm all the way through. Again, if you want to cut into a piece, it's not the end of the world. It's your choice. As I said, this feels firm all the way through. Monkfish doesn't flake quite as readily as other fish, so it's less of an indicator of doneness. You can see how great those tomatoes look on top. The fish is pearly white. And just so that this fish stays warm, I'm going to take this cartouche and just put it right over the top and set this aside in a place that's a little bit warm. Next step for this preparation is to turn up the heat here full blast. And the reason we're going to do that is because we have this wonderful liquid, this poaching liquid. The French have a name for it, cuisson, which is nothing more than a liquid that's the result of a previous cooking technique. So this is cuisson at the end of the day. There's no reason you can't taste it at this point. There's no raw fish in here any longer. And it's got the acid from the wine. It's got the richness, not just of the fish stock, but also the savor that came from this fish and the tomatoes and the thyme. So what needs to happen is this liquid needs to reduce down. We need to cook the water out of it until we have a flavor concentrate. And that flavor concentrate will be the basis of our sauce. We need to decide on a vehicle for that concentrate. And what I've chosen here is cream. We're going to add cream. We'll let that reduce as well, but not until this flavor is concentrated. Okay? So don't put the lid back on. We want that water vapor to escape. While we're waiting for this, I have a pan hot, a saute pan hot here, and I want to saute a little bit of spinach. This spinach we're going to use for this plate. It will be a vegetable that goes along with this fish. We've got another vegetable, which is the topping, the thyme and the tomato. And we could even put a garnish on the plate if we chose to. But maybe this is a great time to make a quick distinction between garnish and garniture. If you add something to this dish, as I did here with the tomato and thyme, that becomes an integral part of the dish. That becomes a garniture. A garnish is something separate, a little piece of parsley or a wedge of lemon that on a good day can be used in the dish, but really is separate from the dish. we're taking advantage of this garniture to make that monkfish look even a little bit more special. All right, here is some spinach. I'm going to put some oil in this pan. This is just olive oil. I'm going to turn the heat up. And spinach really doesn't take any time at all to cook. I'll barely have enough time to season it before it's already done. And I would say that's it. We don't need to worry about that any longer. So it took us maybe 10 minutes, but what you can see here is that this liquid has reduced down nearly dry. And if you taste it, it is concentrated, maybe even over-concentrated, but that's just as it should be. It's a little too salty, a little bit too acidic. Now I'm going to add cream, and this will become our sauce. I'll take you back to what I said earlier. At the end of the day, we need enough sauce for 4 pieces of fish. Any more sauce, and we lose flavor. Any less sauce, and we can't serve the fish. So you can always judge. This cream is going to reduce by about 40% maybe. It's going to need to get a little bit thick. Right now this sauce is slightly thin. So we'll put that on the heat and let it reduce. It's starting to taste very, very good. One last little piece of business here. I want to put some basil in this dish. Basil is an herb that is delicious with tomatoes. It figures into Provençal cooking, but it has a problem. And the problem is that when you cut it, it will start to turn brown. So don't chop it willy-nilly the way you might chop parsley. Instead, there's a technique called chiffonade, and you hear in there the word chiffon, something very light. I'm going to take these leaves and stack them one on top of the other. I'm going to roll them up into a little cigar, and then I'm going to take a sharp knife and just cut it into ribbons, very, very small ribbons. And this is perhaps the least invasive way of cutting this basil so that it holds on to its green color and doesn't turn black because of enzymes that are suddenly exposed to air. There is my basil chiffonade. You can see how nice and light it is. Okay, we're just about done. The fish goes back into the sauce very, very briefly to warm. Along with any liquid. We have the opportunity to evaluate the sauce one last time. The consistency looks good. It's coating the back of a spoon very nicely, so I can turn it off. It's great. So, not too thick, nice assertive seasoning, nice balance of flavor. What I'm tasting in there is the savory flavor of the fish stock and the monkfish itself, the thyme, the tomatoes, and then it's all smoothed out with cream, properly seasoned with salt. I'm going to take and put some potatoes on this plate. These are mashed potatoes. And I'm going to grab the spinach that we cooked a little bit earlier. Set it up as bands of color. And then I'm going to take the nicest looking piece of fish I've got, and we'll move that over. If you like the idea of a little bit of lemon with your fish, I'm going to add a branch of thyme. Now, garnish, garniture, okay? And then finally, we need to get some sauce on here. And in a shallow poached dish like this, this is really the dish. I mean, that fish is good, but this rocks. So, gather up the sauce, and you want to mask the fish with some of the sauce. And then you want to make sure that your potatoes taste good because of the sauce, and your spinach tastes good because of the sauce. And then you'll have it just about right. Let's take a little bit of this basil, which is nice and aromatic, and sprinkle it over. And that's it. Shallow poached monkfish Provençal. It's a Provençal dish that takes advantage of moist heat cooking. This technique is different from deep poaching in that the sauce is an integral part of the dish. It's really delicious, and I know you're going to enjoy it, so I want to encourage you to get into the kitchen and try this as fast as you can. So we've poached a lot of fish today. We've talked about moist heat cooking techniques, but I don't want you to go away thinking that poaching is the only moist heat cooking technique. And so I've gathered up a number of different things that I want to show you here. In this first pot, I've got green beans that are boiling. Now, they're boiling pretty well, and you can see the difference between a pot that's at a boil and a pot that's at a simmer. This is up at 212 degrees, where a simmer is 185, just a few bubbles forming on the bottom, and a lot of steam coming off, but the occasional bubble breaking the surface. And then we saw poaching, where there was no bubbles at all, down around 160. It's really important for green beans that they be cooked aggressively and fast. Otherwise, they'll lose their color. So I'm going to gather these up, and I'll put them right into cold water to stop the cooking. And in a restaurant setting anyways, these might be recooked later on. They might be sautéed with a little bit of fat and reheated so that they could be served. So there's a few green beans. Those were boiled. If we move down to here, there's the one that got away. If we move down to here, I have a steamer. Now, steamed vegetables don't sound that sexy, I'll admit it. But you ask yourself, what is the benefit of steaming? It's an efficient cooking technique that has temperature available higher than boiling, so beyond 212 degrees. So the vegetables will cook quickly. This is a technique that doesn't water down flavor or impact it. So if I were steaming broccoli, for example, and you wanted to taste broccoli, this would be the cooking technique of choice. And then finally, if I have broccoli and I boil it in a pot of water that's at a rolling boil, it will get beat up. It'll bump against itself. So what I have here is broccoli that has been steamed, and when I take it out and put it on the plate, what you'll notice is that each floret is perfect, you know? And I could put butter on this after the fact and season it with salt and pepper, but because I steamed it, it will taste of broccoli and look like broccoli. And then finally, way down here at the end, from a different culture entirely, is a steamer that has some open shumai dumplings in it. Because these dumplings are open to the top, I could not boil them without all of their flavor washing away. And my only option then is to steam them the way I'm doing here. So I'm going to grab a couple of those and I'll put them on the plate. Boiled, steamed, steamed. Okay, that's moist heat cooking. We've done a lot of different things today. We poached salmon, we poached monkfish, we boiled green vegetables, steamed broccoli, and even steamed some dumplings. You've learned a lot. What you need to do is pay attention to the details and practice them in your own kitchen. When we come back, we're going to focus on something very different, a combination cooking method that embraces not just sauté, but moist heat cooking, raising and stewing. I hope you'll join me then.